The massive black ship hung in the darkness above the dying world of Altara. Its metal hull stretched for miles, covered in sharp spikes and glowing red lights that looked like angry eyes. This was the Death's Shadow, one of the most feared ships. In the Catherian Empire's fleet, on the bridge, Commander Velfax stood with his forearms crossed behind his back. His gray skin was covered in scars from 100 battles, and his yellow eyes watched the planet below with cold satisfaction. The Alterans had thought they could resist the Empire. They had been wrong. "Sir, the last city has fallen," reported Lieutenant Kurnash from his station. The young officer's voice shook slightly. Even after 5 years serving under Velfac, he still felt sick watching entire civilizations burn. Velfac's mouth twisted into what passed for a smile among his species. "Good. How long did they last?" 43 days, sir? Longer than most? The vegans lasted only 12 days. The Centaurians surrendered after seeing our ships. Velthok walked to the large window that showed the planet below. Smoke rose from what had once been beautiful cities. "Fear is our greatest weapon, Lieutenant. When a species sees what happens to those who resist, they learn to obey." The Catherian Empire had ruled the galaxy for over 1,000 years using this simple method. They would arrive at a new world with overwhelming force. They would destroy one city as an example. Usually that was enough. The local government would surrender, agree to pay tribute, and accept Catherian rule. Those who refused to surrender watched their entire civilization burn. "Sir, we're receiving a message from the surface." Another officer called out, "Put it through." The voice that came through the speakers was weak and broken. "Please ... we surrender. We'll give you whatever you want. Just stop the killing." Velthok nodded to his communications officer. "Tell them they should have surrendered 43 days ago. They will now pay double tribute for the next century, and they will build a monument to Catherian power in every remaining city." Sir, this was how it always went. The Catherians had perfected the art of breaking the spirit of entire species. They didn't want to rule empty worlds. They wanted subjects who would work, who would mine precious metals, who would build ships and weapons for the Empire. But these subjects had to be completely broken first. Velfac remembered his first campaign as a young officer, 40 years ago. He had felt sorry for the conquered peoples then. His commander, the legendary General Thrakmer, had taught him an important lesson. "Mercy is weakness," the old general had said as they watched refugees flee a burning city. "Show mercy once, and every species in the galaxy will think they can resist us. Our empire exists because we are feared. The moment that fear is gone, we are finished." Those words had shaped Velfac's entire career. He had destroyed 17 civilizations and conquered 43 worlds. He was known throughout the galaxy as the Planet Killer. When species heard his name, they surrendered without a fight. "Set course for the vegan system," Velthok ordered. "The mining colonies there are behind on their tribute payments. They need a reminder of what happens to those who disappoint the Empire." "Yes, sir. Estimated arrival time is 6 days." Velfac walked back to his command chair. The bridge was quiet, except for the hum of the ship's engines and the soft beeping of various instruments. His crew knew better than to make unnecessary noise. He demanded perfect discipline at all times. As the ship turned toward its next destination, Velshak thought about the empire he served. The Catherian homeworld was a harsh place of red sand and black rock. Resources were scarce, and his people had learned to take what they needed from others. When they developed space travel, they brought this philosophy to the stars. The first species they encountered had been peaceful traders called the Eltani. The Catherians had demanded tribute. When the Eltani refused, the Catherians destroyed their entire fleet and occupied their worlds. It had been surprisingly easy. Word spread quickly through the galaxy. The Catherians were ruthless, powerful, and impossible to defeat. Most species surrendered as soon as Catherian ships appeared in their systems. Those who resisted were crushed so thoroughly that other species learned from their example. Sir, Lieutenant Kurnash said quietly, "The destruction of Altara will be broadcast to all Empire worlds within the hour. Standard procedure." Good. Velthak knew that millions of beings across the galaxy would watch the recordings of Altara's destruction. He would see the burned cities, the fleeing refugees, the massive Catherian ships hovering like dark angels of death. And they would remember why they paid their tribute on time. The Empire's propaganda ministry made sure these recordings reached every corner of known space. They wanted everyone to understand that resistance was not just futile, it was suicide. As the Death's shadow entered hyperspace, Velthak felt the familiar satisfaction of another successful campaign. The galaxy remained under Catherian control. Fear remained their most powerful weapon. He had no way of knowing that in a distant part of the galaxy, his scouts had just discovered a small blue world whose inhabitants would soon change everything. Scout Captain Mordic stared at the blue and green planet spinning slowly on his screen. His ship, the Silent Hunter, had been exploring this remote part of the galaxy for 3 months. Most of the worlds they found were empty rocks or gas giants. This one was different. "Captain, I'm reading massive life signs," reported Science Officer Velka from her station. "The third planet has over 8 billion intelligent beings living on it." Mordic's 4 eyes widened. 8 billion was a huge population. Most civilizations, they discovered, had only a few million people spread across their worlds. "What is their technology level?" "Very primitive, sir. They've barely left their own planet. Our fastest ships use chemical rockets. Their weapons are basic nuclear devices." Elka paused, checking her readings again. "They call themselves humans, and they call their world Earth." The captain laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the small bridge. "Humans? What kind of name is that?" He studied the data flowing across his screens. Humans had built cities across their entire planet. They had created a global communication system, but their technology was at least 500 years behind the Empire's. "Sir, should we contact the nearest Imperial fleet?" asked his pilot, Ensign Thokovar. "No need, we can handle this ourselves." Mordic had conquered primitive worlds before. It was always the same. Show up with superior technology, destroy something to prove your power, and wait for the surrender. "Signal the rest of our squadron. We'll follow standard first contact protocol." Within hours, 5 Catherian ships had gathered above Earth. They were small compared to the Empire's great warships, but they were still massive compared to anything the humans had built. Each ship was over a mile long. Armed with weapons that could destroy entire cities, Mordic positioned his ships above the humans' largest population centers. One ship hung over a place called New York. Another floated above Tokyo. The remaining ships took positions over London, Beijing, and Moscow. The humans must have detected them by now. Their primitive radar systems would be screaming warnings. "Begin the demonstration," Mordic ordered. The first blast struck an empty desert on a continent the humans called Africa. The energy beam turned sand into glass for miles around. It was a small display of power, just enough to show what Catherian weapons could do. "Sir, we're receiving signals from the planet," reported Communications Officer Ralvin. "Lots of them. They're broadcasting on multiple frequencies. Put the strongest signal through." The voice that came through the speakers spoke in a language Mordic had never heard before. It sounded strange, with soft vowels and harsh consonants. The translation computer worked quickly to decode it. "This is the United Nations of Earth, calling the unknown vessels. We wish to establish peaceful contact. Please respond." Mordic blinked in surprise. Peaceful contact? Species either attacked immediately or begged for mercy. These humans. "We're asking for a conversation." "Send the standard surrender demand," he told Ralvin. "Tell them they have 1 day to submit to Imperial rule or face destruction." The message was transmitted in the human language. Mordic expected an immediate response of fear and submission. Instead, silence stretched for several minutes. Finally, the humans replied, "We received your message. We would like to understand your demands better. Can we arrange a meeting to discuss terms?" They want to discuss terms? Mordic couldn't believe what he was hearing. They want a meeting? Yes, sir. They seem to think this is some kind of negotiation. Mordic had conquered 47 worlds in his career. Never had a species ask for a meeting after seeing Catherian weapons. They usually surrendered immediately or prepared for hopeless battle. "Increase the demonstration," he ordered. "Target one of their military bases." The second blast completely destroyed a human military facility in a place called Nevada. The explosion could be seen from space, a bright flash that lit up the planet's surface. Surely now the humans would understand. The response came an hour later. We saw your demonstration. We're impressed by your technology. Our scientists would like to study the energy signatures you used. Perhaps we can learn from each other. Mordek's jaw dropped open. They want to study our weapons? It appears so, sir. They're also asking about our culture, our history, and our reasons for being here. This was completely outside Mordek's experience. The humans had just watched a military base disappear in seconds, and they were asking questions like curious. Children. Where was the fear? Where was the panic? Sir Velka called from her science station. I'm detecting massive activity across the planet. They're evacuating their major cities, but they're doing it in an organized way. No panic, no chaos. They're moving people to safe areas while keeping their governments and military functioning. Mordek studied the readings. The humans were preparing for war, but they were also still trying to communicate. They seemed to be treating this as both a threat and an opportunity. Send another message, he decided. Tell them they have 12 hours to surrender unconditionally, or we will begin destroying their cities. The human response came quickly. We understand your position. We're prepared to discuss surrender terms, but we need guarantees about the safety of our population. We also have questions about what you expect from us. Even facing total destruction, the humans were asking questions and making demands. Mordek had never encountered anything like it. Dr. Jiho Kim pushed his glasses up his nose as he stared. At the computer screen, the alien blast site in Nevada was still glowing with strange energy readings. Around him, the emergency research center buzzed with activity. Scientists from every country had gathered in Geneva to study humanity's first contact with aliens. The energy signature is unlike anything we've ever seen, he told the group of researchers crowded around his workstation. But look at this pattern. They're using directed particle beams, but the power source seems to be some kind of controlled fusion reaction. Dr. Yuna Park, a physicist from Seoul National University, leaned over his shoulder. If we can understand how they control the fusion process, we might be able to develop countermeasures. Outside the research center, the world was changing rapidly. The alien ships still hung over major cities like dark clouds. Most people had evacuated 2 smaller towns and rural areas, but there was no mass panic. Instead, humanity seemed to be treating the invasion as the greatest puzzle they had ever encountered. President Minho Han stood in the emergency command. Centered deep beneath the Swiss Alps, military leaders from around the world surrounded him, all watching the same satellite feeds of the alien vessels. They've made no move to attack civilian populations, reported General Haijin Choi, studying tactical displays. Every demonstration has been against empty targets or military bases. They want us afraid, not dead. What does that tell us? President Han asked. They need us for something. Slaves, workers, resources from our planet. But they need us alive. The general pointed to the screens showing the alien ships. These vessels are small compared to what a real invasion force would look like. This is psychological warfare. Ambassador Sujin Lee had been trying to establish communication with the aliens for 3 days. The creatures called themselves Catherians, and they seemed genuinely confused by humanity's responses. They keep asking why we haven't surrendered, yet she reported to the emergency council. They seem to think there's something wrong with us because we're not terrified enough. What have you told them? The truth, that we're curious about them, that we want to understand their technology and their culture, that we're willing to negotiate, but we need to know what they want. She paused, checking her notes. They don't seem to understand the concept of negotiation. In laboratories around the world, teams of scientists worked around the clock studying pieces of debris from the alien weapons tests. The Catherians had vaporized an old military base, but they had left behind traces of their technology in the surrounding area. Engineer Dong Yun-oh led a team in South Korea that was trying to reverse engineer the alien energy systems. The readings suggest they're using a form of controlled antimatter reaction, he explained to his colleagues. But the containment system is something we've never seen before. His assistant, Dr. Seon-woo Kim, looked up from her calculations. If we can figure out how their containment works, we might be able to create shields that can deflect their energy beams. That's impossible, said another scientist. Their technology is hundreds of years ahead of ours, Dong-Yun replied, with a small smile. But impossible just means we haven't figured it out yet. The Catherian commander was growing increasingly frustrated. Captain Mordick had expected the humans to surrender within hours of his arrival. Instead, they had been asking questions for a week. "Sir, we're receiving another transmission from the surface," reported his communications officer. "They want to know about our home planet's culture and history." "They what?" Mordick couldn't believe it. The humans were facing extinction, and they wanted to know about Catherian poetry and art. "They're also asking if we need anything. Food, water, repairs for our ships. They say they want to be good hosts." Mordick stared at the blue planet below. In his 40 years of service, he had never encountered a species that offered to help their conquerors. Most civilizations either fought desperately or cowered in terror. These humans seemed to be treating the situation like a visit from interesting neighbors. "Sir," his science officer interrupted, "I'm detecting unusual energy readings from the planet's surface. They appear to be conducting experiments with high-energy particles." "What kind of experiments?" "It looks like they're trying to recreate our weapon signatures. They're actually studying our technology and attempting to duplicate it." This was completely against everything Mordick had learned about conquest. Primitive species were supposed to be helpless in the face of superior technology. They weren't supposed to immediately start trying to copy it. "Send another message," he ordered. "Tell them they have 24 hours to surrender, or we will destroy one of their cities." The human response came within an hour. "We understand your deadline. We're prepared to discuss terms. However, we notice that your ships have been in position for a week without taking hostile action against civilians. This suggests you prefer negotiated solutions. We appreciate this approach and hope we can reach an agreement that benefits both our species." Mordick read the message 3 times. The humans were facing annihilation, and they were complimenting him on his restraint. They were thanking him for not killing them yet. "Sir," his pilot said quietly, "perhaps we should contact Fleet Command. The situation is not developing according to standard protocols." Mordick nodded slowly. He was beginning to think these humans might be the strangest species in the galaxy. They responded to threats with curiosity, to superior force with scientific interest, and to conquest with hospitality. For the first time in his career, he wasn't sure what would happen next. 3 weeks had passed since the Catherians first appeared over Earth, in a hidden laboratory beneath Sol. Dr. Jiho Kim watched as the experimental shield generator hummed to life. The device was crude, built from salvaged electronics and theories, based on alien energy signatures, but it was working. "Power levels are stable," reported his assistant, Dr. Unipark. "The containment field is holding." Jiho wiped sweat from his forehead. They had been working 18 hours a day, barely stopping to eat or sleep. Round the world, similar teams were racing to understand Catherian technology. The breakthrough had come from studying the glass formations left behind by alien weapon. "Strikes tested," Jiho said. The team fired a high-energy laser at the shield. The beam struck an invisible barrier 3 feet from the generator and scattered harmlessly in all directions. The shield held. "It works," Yuna whispered. "We actually did it." Meanwhile, in orbit above Earth, Captain Mordick was receiving the most disturbing report of his career. "Sir, the humans have somehow developed defensive shields," his science officer reported. "They're crude, but they're based on our own technology. It's impossible. Their science is centuries behind ours." "Yes, sir, but they appear to have reverse-engineered our weapon systems by studying the blast sites. They've created functioning shield generators in less than a month." Mordick stared at the readouts in disbelief. The Catherian Empire's greatest advantage was their technological superiority. No primitive species had ever managed to copy Imperial technology so quickly. On the surface, Ambassador Sujin Lee was preparing for the most important broadcast in human history. Scientists had worked around the clock to create a dozen shield generators. It was time to show the Catherians that humanity was not helpless. "This is Earth 2 Catherian vessels," she transmitted. "We would like to demonstrate something." Small human spacecraft, barely larger than a fighter jet, rose from the planet's surface. The ship was equipped with one of the experimental shield generators. As the Catherians watched, the human pilot deliberately flew into the path of a low-power energy beam from the alien ships. The beam struck the shield and bounced away harmlessly. Impossible. Mordic breathed. The human ship transmitted a message. "Thank you for helping us understand your technology. We're fast learners." But humanity's learning didn't stop there. Engineer Dong Yuno had been working on something even more ambitious. In secret facilities around the world, teams were building small spacecraft equipped with both shields and weapons based on Catherian designs. More importantly, humanity had begun sharing this technology. "The message drones are ready," Dong Yun told President Min Ho Han during a secure video conference. "We can transmit the shield technology specifications to other worlds in the galaxy." Other worlds. The Catherians mentioned several species they've conquered. If we can contact these civilizations and share our defensive technology, we might not be fighting alone. The plan was ambitious and dangerous. Small, fast ships would carry data packages to systems mentioned in Catherian communications. Package contained detailed instructions for building shield generators, using commonly available materials. Dr. Seon-woo Kim led the first mission to the vegan colonies. Her ship was barely larger than a shuttle, equipped with experimental faster-than-light engines based on captured Catherian technology. The journey took 2 days. When she arrived at Vega, she found a civilization living in fear. The vegans were tall, thin beings with blue skin and large eyes. They had surrendered to the Catherians decades ago and lived under constant threat of destruction. "You're from Earth?" the vegan leader asked in amazement. "The world that refuses to surrender?" "We brought you something," Seon-woo replied, uploading the shield technology to their computers. Instructions for defending yourselves. Similar missions reached the Altarians, the Centaurians, and a dozen other subjugated species. Each world received the same gift, the knowledge to protect themselves from Catherian weapons. The response was immediate. Within days, reports began flooding into Catherian command centers across the galaxy. Rebellions were breaking out on worlds that had been peaceful for decades. Tribute shipments were being attacked. Colonial governors were requesting military support. Commander Velthok stood on the bridge of his flagship, reading report after report of uprisings. Worlds that had been conquered generations ago were suddenly fighting back with weapons and shields they shouldn't have been able to build. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the Altarian system," his communications officer reported. "The rebels are using modified Catherian technology. They're demanding independence." "How is this possible?" "Intelligence suggests the technology originated from Earth, sir. The humans appear to be sharing defensive systems with other species." Elthok felt a chill run through his scaled body. In over 1,000 years, no species had ever successfully helped others resist the Empire. The Catherians maintained control by keeping their subjects isolated and afraid. "Contact Emperor Zarthok immediately," he ordered. "Tell him the humans have done something unprecedented. They've turned our own technology against us and shared it with every species in the galaxy." On Earth, President Han watched reports of the spreading rebellions with quiet satisfaction. Humanity had learned something the Catherians never expected. Their greatest strength wasn't in fighting alone, but in helping others fight for themselves. Sir General Hijin Choi reported, "Our deep space sensors are detecting a massive fleet approaching from the Catherian home system. It looks like they're sending everything they have." "Then it's working," Han replied. "We've scared them enough that they're bringing their entire military to stop us." The final battle was coming, but humanity wouldn't face it alone. The largest fleet in Catherian history hung in space above Earth, like a dark storm cloud. Over 300 warships had gathered, led by Emperor Zarthok himself aboard the massive dreadnought Empire's Wrath. The ship was 5 miles long. Armed with weapons that could crack planets in half, Captain Minjae Song stood on the bridge of the human flagship New Hope, watching the alien armada through the viewscreen. His ship was tiny compared to the Catherian vessels, but it carried something the Empire had never faced before. "Hope, sir. We're receiving messages from across the galaxy," reported Communications Officer Unikong. "Rebel fleets from 47. Star systems are reporting they're ready to fight. Oh, meh. Minjay nodded calmly. 3 months ago, humanity had been alone against impossible odds. Now they had allies from every corner of the galaxy. The vegans had built a fleet of shield-equipped ships. The Altarians had modified old mining vessels into warships. Even the peaceful Centaurians had joined the fight. "Sir," called out Tactical. "Officer Hyunwoo Park, the Emperor's ship is broadcasting." The view screen filled with the image of Emperor Zarthak. He was massive even for a Catharian, with scars covering his gray skin and cold yellow eyes that had watched 1,000 worlds burn. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of a millennium of conquest. "Humans of Earth," the Emperor said, "you have caused enough chaos. Surrender now, and I will allow your species to serve the Empire as slaves. Refuse, and I will turn your world into dust and glass." President Min Ho-han appeared on screens throughout the human fleet. He was an ordinary-looking man, small and quiet compared to the alien Emperor. But when he spoke, his words carried the weight of 8 billion people who refused to be afraid. "Your empire ends today," Han said simply. "Not because we're stronger than you, but because we've shown the galaxy that you can be beaten. Fear was your only real weapon, and we took that away." Zarthok's eyes blazed with fury. "You think your primitive shields can stop the full might of the Empire? I will show you what real power looks like." The Emperor's flagship opened fire. Energy beams that could vaporize mountains struck the human fleet, but the shields held. Ships that should have been destroyed in seconds continued fighting, their defensive screens glowing white-hot but not failing. "Return fire," Minjay ordered. The human weapons were crude copies of Catharian technology, but they worked. Energy beams lanced out from the New Hope and struck the Emperor's ship. For the first time in over 1,000 years, Catharian dreadnought took damage from an enemy attack. But the real battle wasn't happening around Earth, across the galaxy. The Empire was falling apart from within. On the bridge of his ship near Vega, Commander Velthok received a message that made his blood run cold. "Sir, the crew of the Dark Vengeance has mutinied. They're demanding we surrender to the rebels." "What? Lieutenant Mornash is leading the mutiny, sir. He says he's tired of destroying innocent worlds. Half our fleet is joining him." Velthok looked around his own bridge and saw doubt in his officer's eyes. These were beings who had served the Empire faithfully for decades. But something had changed. The humans had shown them that the Emperor could be defied, and that realization was spreading like wildfire. "Sir," his communications officer said quietly, "I'm receiving surrender requests from Catharian commanders in 12 different systems. Their own crews are turning against them." The Empire's greatest weakness was finally revealed. Their entire military was made up of conquered species who served only because they had no choice. When hope appeared, when resistance became possible, the Empire's own forces began to rebel. Emperor Zarthok watched in horror as his mighty fleet began to tear itself apart. Ships that had served the Empire for centuries were suddenly firing on each other. Crews were mutinying. Entire squadrons were deserting to join the rebels. "How?" he demanded, staring at the small human ships that continued to fight despite overwhelming odds. "How did you do this?" The answer came from an unexpected source. On the Catharian ship, Death's Shadow, former Commander Velthok had been placed under arrest by his own crew. As they prepared to surrender to the rebels, he sent one final message to his Emperor. "They showed us something we had forgotten," Velthok said. "They showed us that we had a choice. The Battle of Earth lasted 3 days, but by the second day, it was clear that the Empire was finished. Catharian ships across the galaxy were surrendering or being destroyed by their own crews. Species that had been enslaved for centuries were declaring independence. On the 3rd day, Emperor Zarthok's flagship was surrounded by a coalition fleet made up of humans, vegans, Altarians, and dozens of other species. Even many Catharian ships had joined the rebels. "This is impossible," the Emperor said as his ship's shields failed. "We ruled through fear for 1,000 years. Fear only works," President Han replied, "until someone refuses to be afraid." The surrender was broadcast across the galaxy. Catharian Empire, the greatest tyranny in galactic history, had fallen to a species that had barely learned to travel between stars in the months that followed. The Galactic Confederation was established. Humanity became its founding member, not as conquerors, but as teachers. They had learned the most important lesson of all. Real strength came not from making others afraid, but from helping them find courage. Velthek, awaiting trial for his crimes, spent his remaining days trying to understand how these strange humans had changed everything. The answer, he finally realized, was simple. They had refused to believe that freedom was impossible.